No one ever called her beautiful. Then a cowboy truly looked at her and whispered the words she'd needed forever.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The dust storm had been raging for 3 days when he rode into town. Clara May Bennett watched from the window of her father's general store, her fingers pressed against the cold glass as the stranger dismounted from his exhausted horse. His hat was pulled low, his shoulders broad beneath a worn leather coat, and something about the way he moved told her he carried the weight of 1,000 lonely miles. She should have looked away, a respectable woman of 24, unmarried and already the subject of whispered pity in Copper Creek, had no business staring at drifters. But Clara had stopped caring about what the townsfolk thought long ago, right around the time they started calling her the plain Bennett girl, as if her younger sister's beauty had somehow stolen all the pretty for their family. The bell above the door chimed, and suddenly he was there, filling the cramped space of the store with his presence. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with dust and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering over the mountains. A scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, and his jaw was shadowed with days of unshaven growth. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice rough as gravel but somehow gentle. "I'm looking for work, anything at all. I can fix what's broken, tend animals, haul whatever needs hauling." Clara's father had died 6 months prior, leaving her with a failing store, a mountain of debt, and a roof that leaked in 4 different places. She should have said no. She should have sent him to the Miller Ranch or the Hartley Farm, where strong men were always needed and pretty daughters awaited. Instead, she heard herself say, "The back storeroom needs organizing. I can pay you in meals and a dry place to sleep. That's all I can offer." He studied her face for a long moment, and Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew what he saw. Plain features, mousy brown hair escaping from its pins, hands roughened by work, a dress 3 years out of fashion. Nothing worth looking at twice. But he didn't look away. "That sounds fair to me, ma'am. Name's Elijah Cole. Clara Bennett. Just Clara is fine." He worked through the night. Clara brought him supper, simple stew and bread she'd baked that morning, and found him reorganizing the chaos her father had left behind. He'd already fixed the broken shelf and reinforced the sagging storage bins. When she set down the tray, their hands brushed, and she pulled back as if burned. "You didn't have to bring this yourself," he said softly. "There's no one else to bring it." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Understanding, perhaps, the recognition of one lonely soul meeting another. Days turned into weeks. Elijah fixed the leaking roof, repaired the crooked porch steps, and painted the faded storefront. Customers who had stopped coming began returning, commenting on how nice the old Bennett place was looking. Clara caught herself humming while she worked, something she hadn't done since her mother passed 10 years before. She learned pieces of him slowly, like collecting fallen leaves and pressing them between the pages of a book. He'd been a ranch hand in Texas, then a trail driver, then a wanderer searching for something he couldn't name. He had nightmares sometimes. She heard him cry out from the storeroom, but when she asked, he simply shook his head and changed the subject. She learned that he loved the poetry of Tennyson, that he could gentle a frightened horse with just his voice, that he carved small wooden animals in the evenings and left them on the counter, where she would find them each morning. A horse, a bird, a tiny cat with its tail curled around its paws. She kept every single one. It was Sarah Jane Morgan who shattered the fragile peace Clara had built. Sarah Jane with her golden curls and rosebud lips, whose father owned half the town and whose dowry could buy a man a future. She swept into the store one afternoon, her silk dress rustling, her laugh tinkling like expensive crystal. "Oh, Clara," she said, not unkindly but carelessly, in the way of beautiful women who have never known what it means to be overlooked. "I hear you have a handsome stranger working for you. Papa says it's improper, you being an unmarried woman and all. Clara's hands trembled as she wrapped Sarah Jane's purchases. Mr. Cole is an employee. Nothing improper about honest work. Of course not, dear. Sarah Jane's eyes drifted to the back of the store where Elijah was stacking supplies, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his forearms bronze from the sun. My goodness. He is handsome, isn't he? Rough around the edges, but some of us appreciate that. That night, Clara sat in her small room above the store and stared at her reflection in the tarnished mirror. She traced the ordinary lines of her face, the nose that was too strong, the lips that were too thin, the eyes that were neither blue nor green but some indeterminate shade between. She thought of Sarah Jane's porcelain perfection and felt something crack inside her chest. She had been foolish to let herself dream. Of course Elijah would leave. Men like him didn't stay for women like her. He would go to the Morgan Ranch, where Sarah Jane would flutter her eyelashes and offer him everything Clara could not. Land, money, beauty, a future bright with promise. The tears came silently, the way Clara had learned to cry as a child so her father wouldn't hear and call her weak. She pressed her hand over her mouth and let the grief wash through her. Grief for hopes she should never have allowed herself to hold. She didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs, didn't hear the soft knock at her door, only realized he was there when his voice came through the thin wood, quiet and concerned. Clara. R.Y. Oh, all right. She couldn't answer, couldn't trust her voice not to betray her. I'm coming in, he said, and the door opened slowly. She turned away, wiping furiously at her face, humiliation burning through her. Of all the times for him to see her, when she was at her most pitiful, her most plain, her most utterly unremarkable. Please go, she whispered. But he didn't go. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his despite her attempts to pull away. His fingers were warm and calloused, gentle as they held hers. Tell me, he said simply. It's nothing, just tired. The store takes so much. Tell me the truth. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. Concern, yes, but something deeper. Something that made her heart hammer against her ribs. Why are you still here? She asked, the question torn from somewhere deep inside her. Sarah Jane Morgan. She's beautiful and wealthy and everything a man could want. Why are you fixing my roof and organizing my storeroom when you could be building a life at the Morgan Ranch? He was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because Sarah Jane Morgan never looked at me like I was a man worth saving. Because she never brought me supper with her own hands, or asked about my nightmares, or kept the little wooden things I made as if they were precious. He reached up, tucking a strand of loose hair behind her ear. Because in 6 months of wandering, I never found anything worth stopping for, until I walked through your door and saw a woman with the saddest, strongest, most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. Clara shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Don't. Please don't say things you don't mean just to be kind. I know what I am. I know what I look like. I've heard it my whole life. The plain one, the one men overlook, the one who'll be lucky if anyone takes her at all. Elijah's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something fierce flashed in his eyes. Anger, but not at her. At every person who had ever made her feel less than she was. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet and leading her to the mirror. Look, he said, standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders. Really look. She tried to pull away, but he held her steady. I see a woman who kept her father's store alive when everyone expected her to fail, who works from dawn until dusk without complaint, who feeds stray cats and gives credit to families who can't pay and remembers every customer's name and what they need before they even ask. His voice dropped lower, softer. I see hands that have known hard work and never been ashamed of it, Hair the color of autumn and eyes that hold more depth than any ocean. I see a mouth that curves just so when she's trying not to smile at something I've said. He turned her to face him, tipping her chin U.P. So she had no choice but to meet his gaze. The people who called you plain were blind, he said. They looked at you and saw only what they expected to see. They never looked close enough to find what I found. And what did you find? She whispered. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm on her lips. Everything. Everything I didn't know I was searching for. Everything I was afraid didn't exist. You are so beautiful it hurts me to look at you sometimes. Not because of your face, though I love your face, but because of who you are. Because of the way you make this world feel less empty just by being in it. The first press of his lips against hers was soft, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, all the loneliness of her 24 years pouring into this single point of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with something like wonder. I'm not a wealthy man, he said. I've got nothing to offer you but 2 strong hands and a heart that's been yours since the moment you handed me that first bowl of stew. I know you deserve better than a wanderer with a scarred face and a past I'm still running from. But if you'll have me, Clara, I swear to God I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how beautiful you are, how wanted, how loved. The word hung in the air between the loved, and Clara realized with sudden clarity that she had been waiting her whole life to hear it. Not from just anyone. From him, this man who had stumbled into her store covered in dust and exhaustion, and had somehow seen her when everyone else had looked right through. Stay, she said, the word both a plea and a gift. Please stay. His smile was slow and warm, lighting up his weathered face, softening the hard edges of his scar. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. The morning came soft and golden, painting the little room above the general store in shades of honey and rose. Clara woke to find Elijah already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. Morning, he said softly. Morning. She felt suddenly shy, aware of her tangled hair and sleep-creased cheek. How long have you been watching me? A while. Couldn't help it. He reached out, tracing the curve of her cheek with one gentle finger. Do you know what I was thinking? She shook her head. I was thinking about all the places I've been, all the roads I've traveled, all the times I wondered if I'd ever find somewhere that felt like home. He smiled, that slow, heart-stopping smile that made her breath catch. And then I thought about how all those roads led me here, to this town, this store, this woman. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, her nose the corner of her mouth. You are beautiful, he whispered against her lips, and I am the luckiest man alive. Out. Side. Copper Creek was waking up. Soon the store would need opening, and there would be customers to serve, and shelves to stock, and 1,000 small tasks demanding attention. But for this moment, this perfect golden moment, there was only this room, this bed, this man who had wandered into her life and decided to stay. Clara smiled, feeling something bloom in her chest that she barely recognized. Hope, perhaps, or joy, or simply the profound peace of finally being seen, finally being loved, finally being exactly enough. The stew was terrible that first night, she confessed. I was so nervous I forgot to add salt. Elijah laughed, the sound rich and warm and achingly intimate. I know. I choked down every bite because you watched me eat with such worry in your eyes. And I would have eaten 100 more bowls just as bad to see you smile the way you did when I finished. She was crying again. But these were different tears. These were the tears of a woman who had stopped waiting for her life to begin and realized it already had. That love had walked through her door on a dusty evening, and chosen her, playing Clara Bennett, not despite her ordinariness, but because of everything extraordinary he found within it. He stayed, through the winter snows and spring rains, through summer heat and autumn harvest. He stayed while they paid off her father's debts and rebuilt the business and planted a garden behind the store. He stayed when they stood before the preacher in exchange. D-rings worn smooth with promise. He stayed when their first child came screaming into the world, and he held his son with hands that trembled with awe. And every night, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, he would pull her close and whisper the words that had changed her life, the words that had taught her what it meant to be truly seen. "You are beautiful," he would say. "You are beautiful and you are loved, and I am so grateful you let me stay." Clara would smile against his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heart, and think about all the people who had ever called her plain, who had ever made her feel invisible, who had ever looked right through her as if she were made of glass. They had been wrong, all of them wrong. Because one cowboy had looked at her and seen everything, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The cowboy stayed, and that made all the difference.